She sat trembling in seat 3A, her arms wrapped around her small frame, eyes darting away from the flight attendant who had just said, "These aren't for everyone." Everyone else in first class had a blanket, except her. Naomi Carter, 12 years old, top science student in America, was freezing. But it wasn't the cold air that cut the deepest. It was the sting of being publicly shamed. What the flight crew didn't know? Her father runs the entire airline, and he just saw everything, live. Stay until the end. This story doesn't go where you think it will. Naomi Carter had never flown first class before. At 12 years old, she wasn't used to luxury or special treatment, but she also wasn't used to being humiliated either. The air inside United Flight 784 was brisk as always, the kind of recycled chill that made adults reach for cashmere and children huddle under airline blankets. Except Naomi had no blanket, not because she forgot to ask or because she arrived late. She was denied one. It started subtly. When she stepped into the first-class cabin, ticket and passport in hand, the flight attendant standing at the jet bridge frowned. Cheryl Baker didn't hide her skepticism. She examined Naomi's boarding pass with unnecessary scrutiny, flipping it over, holding it up to the light like it might reveal a hidden truth. "First class?" she asked, her tone sharp and disbelieving. Naomi nodded politely, like her father had taught her. "Yes, ma'am." A white businessman behind her shifted impatiently, checking his watch. "The line's backing up," he muttered. Cheryl offered him a professional smile, then returned her blank stare to Naomi. After an excruciating pause, she handed the pass back. "Go ahead." Seat 3A. Naomi tucked herself into the window seat, her small backpack stored neatly under the seat in front. Her legs barely dangled over the edge. She tried to ignore the side glances from other passengers, well-dressed adults mostly, many white, most absorbed in phones or laptops. The man seated next to her, tall, African-American, mid-40s with a clean navy suit, offered a gentle nod. "First time up here?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet. "I'm going to Boston for a science conference." "Impressive," he smiled. "Name's Marcus Allen." Before she could respond, Cheryl appeared again, eyes locked on Naomi like a radar. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi blinked. Sure." She pulled it from her jacket pocket and handed it over. Cheryl inspected it again, lips tight. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone even but firm. "No," Cheryl said too quickly. "Just making sure everyone's where they're supposed to be." She returned the boarding pass with forced politeness, then turned away without acknowledging Marcus. Naomi sank back into her seat. She felt the familiar crawl of shame rising, one she knew too well from growing up Black in elite academic circles. The constant questions of, "Do you belong here?" wrapped in smiles and skepticism. As passengers settled in, Cheryl returned, offering blankets and pillows with a warm smile. To everyone else. Row 1. Row 2. When she reached row 3, she handed a pillow and blanket to Marcus in 3B, then skipped Naomi in 3A. Just moved on. Naomi watched, stunned. Surely it was a mistake. She waited as Cheryl continued down the aisle. Still nothing. She waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Naomi gathered her courage, her voice barely audible over the cabin noise. "Excuse me, could I please have a blanket?" Cheryl paused, turned around slowly, her smile gone. "These aren't for everyone," she said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, then turned and walked off. Gasps. The woman across the aisle blinked in disbelief. A man in row 4 muttered, "Jesus!" under his breath. Marcus stiffened beside Naomi, but Naomi, she froze. 12 years of being taught not to cause trouble. 12 years of keeping her head down. She didn't say another word. She tucked her arms close, eyes on her lap. Her cheeks burned, her throat tightened. "Don't cry, not here." Marcus exhaled slowly. His jaw clenched. "That's enough," he said under his breath. He reached for the call button, then paused. No, not yet. Naomi turned toward the window, trying to disappear. She didn't notice the man in 4C, gray hoodie, thick glasses, lowering his phone back into his lap. He'd been recording since boarding, just in case. 10 minutes later, Naomi felt a sharp blast of cold air above her. The overhead vent had clicked on again, stronger this time. She reached up to adjust it, but it wouldn't budge. The knob spun uselessly. A steady stream of icy air blew down on her shoulders and neck. Cheryl walked by again, not even glancing in her direction. Naomi waited, then pressed the call button. Nothing. Marcus leaned forward. "Excuse me," he called. "This child's freezing. Can she get a blanket or have that vent adjusted?" Cheryl paused mid-step, turned. "The temperature is standard," she said flatly. Perhaps she should have dressed more appropriately. Her eyes locked briefly on Naomi. Then she walked away. Marcus's voice rose slightly. "Is that United Airlines policy now? Selective blanket distribution based on race and age?" No reply. Naomi wanted to disappear. She could feel everyone's eyes now. Her skin crawled with embarrassment. It wasn't just the cold air anymore. It was the heat of humiliation. Across the cabin, Judith Fields, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, scribbled quickly into a small leather-bound notebook. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Timestamp, incident, names, words, behavior. She'd done this before. At the front of the plane, Brandon Holmes, the lead flight attendant, watched everything with quiet discomfort. He shifted awkwardly at the galley, pretending not to notice, but his clenched jaw said otherwise. Naomi texted her father, her fingers trembling. "Cold, forgot jacket, still okay." She didn't tell him about the blanket, or the comment, or the stares. She didn't want to ruin his night. He was always working late, running the entire airline. Naomi didn't want to sound like a bratty kid in first class, but Victor Carter read between lines for a living. And this message? It didn't sit right. In seat 4C, the man in the hoodie glanced down at his phone screen. 37 minutes of footage so far. Audio clear. Cheryl's voice. "These aren't for everyone," was sharp and undeniable. He uploaded it to a cloud folder labeled Flight 784 Journal. Insurance. Always record, he'd learned. Naomi shivered again. Her hands were red now. She pulled her science notes from her bag, trying to review for her presentation. But the words blurred. She couldn't focus. She felt small, invisible, unwanted. Marcus gently removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Here," he said quietly. "This shouldn't be happening." Naomi didn't look up. "Thank you," she whispered. The cabin lights dimmed. The flight continued east, and far away, in a glass tower in Chicago, a man's hand hovered over a button marked Cabin Feed, Live. The cold air didn't just sting Naomi's skin. It chipped at something deeper, a quiet dignity her father had spent years instilling in her. But now, tucked under a stranger's jacket, shivering and silent, she couldn't help but wonder why doing everything right still left her feeling so wronged. 2 weeks earlier, Naomi had stood under bright stage lights in Washington, D.C., the youngest finalist in the National Climate Science Challenge. Her project, an urban green space carbon capture model, had beaten out thousands. Judges praised her work as visionary and decades ahead of her age. She hadn't even smiled when they handed her the glass trophy. She just looked into the crowd where her father sat, jaw clenched with pride, tears in his eyes. That night they celebrated with ice cream and whispered memories of her mother. Naomi's mom, Dana Carter, had died when Naomi was 8. Breast cancer, quiet but brutal. Victor had never remarried. Instead, he had poured everything into raising Naomi, not to be special, but to be strong, to see the world clearly and meet it on her terms. Victor Carter was the head of global operations for United Atlantic Airways. Technically, Naomi could have flown private. She could have arrived in Boston on a corporate jet with full press coverage. But that wasn't the plan. That wasn't how Victor wanted her to experience the world. He'd explained it in one of their long father-daughter talks late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt manageable. "You're brilliant, Naomi," he said, "and the world will celebrate that, eventually. But first, it will question whether you belong. I need you to see that. I need you to know how it feels, because one day you're going to change it." She hadn't understood then, not fully, but she nodded. And that's when he gave her the rule. "Never tell anyone who I am," he said. "Not on this trip. Not unless you absolutely have to. Use Mom's last name. Carter blends in too easily." So on every form, every badge, every media feature, she was listed as Naomi Ellis, Dana's maiden name. No one knew she was the daughter of a man who moved entire fleets with a phone call. The daughter of a man whose signature could reroute trade routes and restructure mergers. Victor Carter could silence an airport if he needed to. But in this moment, Naomi sat anonymous, cold, and invisible. And it was by design. She had agreed to this. No special treatment, no name-dropping, no, "Do you know who my dad is?" Just her science, and the world's response. And tonight, the response had been, "These aren't for everyone." Victor had reservations about letting Naomi travel alone, even in first class. But the Boston Conference was a major opportunity. The International Youth Climate Congress was hosting delegates from over 40 countries. Naomi had been selected to represent the United States, the youngest ever. Her model used public sensor data to calculate carbon absorption in city parks. Simple, scalable, brilliant. That alone had stirred attention. But Victor insisted on anonymity. He had seen too many prodigies burn out under pressure, or worse, lose touch with the reality they were supposed to help improve. He wanted Naomi grounded, literally and figuratively. So she boarded the flight like any 12-year-old would. Passport, backpack, nervous smile. Her jacket too thin, her manners too practiced, and her last name invisible. She had no idea that somewhere in the airline's operational control center, her father was watching. When her text came in, "Cold, forgot jacket, still okay." Victor froze. The timing was off. She never texted mid-flight, and she never complained, especially about comfort. He immediately accessed the live feed system installed on all premium aircraft, a security feature rarely used unless protocol demanded it. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Naomi, in 3A, huddled, still, pale. Everyone else, blankets, pillows, comfort. Her, nothing. He zoomed in. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the blanket distribution window. He rewound. He watched Cheryl's face, her body language, the way she skipped Naomi without hesitation, the way she smirked, the way she said, "These aren't for everyone." Victor didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Then he opened a secure line. He didn't call PR. He didn't call HR. He called the captain. Back on the flight, Naomi tried to distract herself. She flipped through her conference slides, photos of trees, maps, data points. She'd named the project Breathe Back, a nod to reclaiming clean air in marginalized neighborhoods. Most kids her age wrote about the environment from textbooks. Naomi had mapped every tree in her neighborhood by hand. Marcus noticed the screen. "You a scientist?" he asked softly. She shrugged. "Trying to be," he smiled. "You're already there." She glanced at him, surprised by the kindness. Then she caught Cheryl's reflection in the window, walking past again, not even pretending to care. It wasn't the first time Naomi had been treated differently. At a Florida resort, a staff member once asked her 3 times to show her room key while white families walked by unchecked. In school, she was the only black girl in her gifted program. One teacher once said, "You're so articulate," like it was a surprise. But this was the first time she felt it so publicly, so naked. And despite everything she'd accomplished, Awards, trophies, articles. This single moment made her feel small. The sad part? She knew she wasn't alone. There were millions like her, quietly carrying brilliance and pain in equal measure. Her story wasn't unique, but what happened next would be, because someone, somewhere, had just broken protocol, and the chain reaction had already begun. Naomi adjusted her glasses, trying to bury herself deeper into her presentation slides. The screen glowed faintly against the dimmed lights of the cabin, casting shadows over the sharp angles of her determined, silent face. She was freezing, her lips slightly chapped from the dry, cold air, but she kept her head down. If she focused hard enough, maybe she could block out the ache creeping into her bones and the humiliation still clinging to her skin like frost. Cheryl Baker returned with the beverage cart 30 minutes after takeoff, all bright smiles and cheerful tones, at least for the rest of the passengers. "Would you like water or orange juice?" she asked the man in 2A, flashing him a grin. "Sparkling or still?" she asked the woman beside him. When she reached row 3, she turned to Marcus in 3B. "Sir?" "Still water, please," Marcus replied. Without a word, Cheryl poured him a glass. Then she turned. Then she walked away. No offer, no glance. Naomi sat silent, still, as if Cheryl hadn't even seen her. Marcus frowned, twisting slightly in his seat to look back down the aisle. Brandon Holmes stood just outside the galley, pretending to inventory snack packets, though he had clearly watched the entire exchange. His eyes met Marcus's for the briefest moment. Then, he looked away. Naomi didn't move. She wasn't surprised anymore. She just folded her hands in her lap and let the silence settle around her like a second layer of cold. The first time she'd been questioned about her seat was at the gate. "Are you sure this is your boarding pass?" Cheryl had asked, tilting her head like she was giving Naomi the benefit of the doubt, but not really. The tone had been unmistakable. "You don't belong here." The second time came after she'd already settled in. "I'm just double-checking," Cheryl had said then, turning the pass over like it might reveal a secret watermark proving Naomi had faked her way into the front cabin. And now, unbelievably, she was back. Cheryl walked by again, stopping at their row. "Miss," she said, sharp and cold, "can I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi looked up slowly. "Please," Cheryl interrupted, hand extended. Naomi pulled the pass out, fingers trembling slightly. She handed it over. Cheryl studied it for a long moment. She muttered. "You said this was yours, correct? Not someone else's?" A white woman across the aisle chuckled quietly. "She probably borrowed it," the woman said under her breath, not quiet enough. Naomi's chest tightened. Marcus leaned forward, voice steady but tight. "Is this really necessary?" Cheryl smiled without looking at him. "We've had issues in the past. I'm just doing my due diligence." She handed the boarding pass back and walked off without another word. Marcus turned fully toward Naomi now. "You okay?" Naomi nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir." But she wasn't. Not at all. She picked up her phone, thumbs hovering for a long moment, then typed, "I'm fine. A little cold, but I can handle it." Victor read the message in his office, eyes narrowing. Another vague text, another downplay. He reread it 3 times. Something wasn't right. His daughter was too sharp, too composed to message mid-flight unless she absolutely needed to. And the careful language, "handle it," was the same tone she'd used when she scraped her knee at age 5 and didn't want him to worry. Victor returned to the live cabin feed. She was still without a blanket, still without a drink, still in the same posture, small, quiet, invisible. He didn't like it. Back on board, Marcus quietly pulled out his phone and opened his United account. As a frequent flyer and education director at a national foundation, he'd filed dozens of in-flight comments over the years. This time, he didn't wait for landing. He opened the feedback form and started typing. "Passenger in seat 3A. Repeatedly ignored by crew during service. 3 separate instances witnessed. Blanket denied. Drink service skipped. Boarding pass questioned multiple times despite valid ticket. Requesting review for potential discrimination. He hit submit. Seconds later, he received an automated reply. Thank you for your feedback. Due to high message volume, only prioritized reports will be reviewed. If this is an emergency, please contact in-flight crew or airport staff upon landing. He frowned. That was unusual. The system normally gave a ticket number or estimated response time. Something had changed. Out of curiosity, Marcus logged into the portal using a secondary email linked to his foundation. He resubmitted the report under a different name. This time, the message bounced entirely. Blocked. Twist 2 was real. The system wasn't overloaded. It was filtering. Somewhere in the back end of the airline's AI infrastructure, a silent filter was in place. Keywords like discrimination, race, mistreatment, flagged, quarantined, and deprioritized. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He'd helped build equity dashboards for public schools. He knew exactly how biases got baked into code. This wasn't an oversight. It was a firewall. Across the aisle, Judith continued writing. She hadn't said a word, but her pen hadn't stopped moving for 45 minutes. Observations, times, names. She had learned long ago the importance of detail, especially when systems tried to erase them. Naomi, meanwhile, stared blankly at her science notes. But in the background of her mind, something was stirring. Not rage, not yet, but a rising question. If this is how they treat me here, how many others never even get this far? Victor Carter sat alone in his corner office, 37 floors above the glowing grid of Chicago's midnight skyline. The city hummed below, but his mind was somewhere thousands of feet higher, in the sky over Pennsylvania, where Flight 784 sliced through the dark, carrying his daughter. The last meeting had ended 2 hours ago. The merger reports were stacked neatly, untouched. The legal counsel had gone home. His executive assistant had offered to stay, but he'd waved her off. Now, the only light in the room came from the massive wall-mounted display in front of him, currently split into 4 live feed panels, each showing a different angle of the first-class cabin. He hadn't told anyone. Accessing the cabin monitoring system required an executive override code, normally reserved for suspected security threats. But something about Naomi's text, the phrasing, the timing, had pressed a button deep inside him that logic couldn't silence. So he keyed in his authorization, bypassed the standard review protocols, and went straight to the feeds. The images came through in high-definition clarity. Naomi sat curled against the window in 3A. The collar of a man's blazer, Marcus's, he assumed, was wrapped around her narrow shoulders. Her lips moved occasionally, whispering silently to herself, maybe rehearsing her presentation, or maybe just trying not to cry. Victor's jaw clenched. In the neighboring seats, other passengers reclined with pillows, eyes closed beneath soft blue blankets. Uniform distribution. Every first-class passenger had one, except Naomi. He toggled to a different angle, the aisle view. He saw Cheryl. She moved with professional grace, her expression pleasant as she handed out water and wine with the practiced charm of 1,000 flights. But when she reached Naomi's row, her body language shifted. Shoulders tensed, smile vanished. Victor rewound, watched it again. Cheryl offered drinks to rows 1 and 2. Marcus in 3B received water. Naomi was skipped. No eye contact, no hesitation. It wasn't forgetfulness, it was intent. He zoomed in on Cheryl's hands. The tray in her grip had 3 cups. She gave 2 away. Returned to the galley with 1 still full. He scanned Brandon's expression next. The lead flight attendant was visible near the galley entrance, his posture stiff, lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen everything. Victor hit pause. The weight of it settled in his chest like a concrete block. This wasn't a single incident. This was systemic, subtle, layered, deliberate. He toggled to a timestamp 20 minutes earlier, the moment when Naomi had reportedly asked for a blanket. In this angle, Cheryl was mid-distribution. She passed Naomi's row without breaking stride. Victor slowed the footage. Frame by frame, he saw her eyes flick down at Naomi, then dart away, her smile tightening at the corners. He advanced 5 minutes, then 10. And then he saw it. Twist 3. In the back of the cabin, just outside the service galley, Cheryl pulled a folded blanket from the supply compartment. She looked left, looked right, then carefully lifted the trash lid beneath the beverage cart and slid the blanket inside. It wasn't even used. Victor froze the frame, zoomed in. The blanket was still sealed in its plastic wrapping. He didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Then he reached for the intercom on his desk. Operations Control, this is Carter. Open secure line. Clearance code Bravo 740. I need monitoring status upgrade. Flight 784. A pause. Then, yes, Mr. Carter. Initiating. He continued, voice even. Engage Level 1 surveillance protocol. Full feed. Biometric tagging. I want behavioral pattern analysis on all crew members in the premium cabin. Flag anomalies. Yes, sir. ETA 2 minutes for analytics sync. Victor's eyes didn't leave the screen. He watched Cheryl continue her service with robotic ease, smiling for every white passenger, turning mechanical with every deviation from the pattern. The AI overlay would confirm it soon enough. He didn't need it to. He already knew what he was looking at. Prejudice, performed behind a plastic smile. He opened his encrypted messenger and typed a single command to his internal executive team. Level 1 active. Possible incident. Containment protocol only. Do not alert flight crew. Across the city, servers hummed to life. Keywords were flagged. Reports were indexed. Anomalies queued for review. This was no longer a customer service issue. It was a liability event. Victor exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His daughter, the one he had sworn to protect, not just as a parent, but as a mentor, was in the middle of something far more insidious than turbulence. He replayed the moment of the discarded blanket again, letting the betrayal settle deeper. Cheryl had chosen to remove resources from the system, just to deny them. That wasn't incompetence. It was sabotage. And the target? A 12-year-old girl who'd done nothing but board a plane with a last name no one recognized. Victor's jaw set. He tapped into the cabin audio logs, isolating voice snippets using speech recognition. There it was. These aren't for everyone. Cold, flat, undeniable. His knuckles whitened on the armrest. He stood, walked to the wall of glass, and stared out over the quiet skyline. He had built his career solving impossible problems, fixing disasters before they exploded, navigating egos, unions, governments. But nothing had prepared him for the sting of watching his daughter shrink into herself while everyone else wrapped themselves in comfort. He looked back at the feed. Naomi had tucked Marcus's jacket closer, her eyes fluttering shut, exhaustion creeping in. Victor whispered aloud, "You're stronger than they know." But even strength has limits. And he wasn't going to let hers be tested any further. Not tonight. Captain Ray Coleman was mid-cruise check when the satellite phone blinked to life, an amber light on the control panel he'd trained his eyes to ignore for years. Most captains went their entire careers without a single in-flight call from ground operations. When it happened, it meant one of three things: mechanical failure, airspace emergency, or a serious security breach. He glanced at his first officer, a younger man named Hughes, who raised an eyebrow. "You expecting something?" Hughes asked. Ray shook his head. "Nope, but somebody is." He lifted the handset. "Captain Coleman speaking." The voice on the other end was calm, clipped, and unmistakably authoritative. "This is Victor Carter, head of global operations, United Atlantic Airways." Ray straightened in his seat. Every captain knew the executive names. Carter wasn't just any suit. He was the operations nerve center. The man who decided where aircraft went, who staffed them, and what protocols governed their every second in the air. The man no one ever expected to hear directly from. "Yes, sir." Ray replied. "How can I assist?" "I'm monitoring live feed from Flight 784. There appears to be a pattern of discriminatory behavior by one of your cabin crew. A minor passenger in first class has been repeatedly denied standard service. I've reviewed the audio and visual logs. The issue is active." Ray inhaled slowly. "Who is the passenger in question?" "My daughter." Silence settled in the cockpit like fog. Ray shifted, the weight of those 3 words hitting heavier than any turbulence. "I see." "I need a status confirmation," Victor continued. "I've engaged Level 1 surveillance protocol. We're containing this internally for now, but if verified, action will be required before landing. Immediate escalation. Full authority is granted." Ray had served 12 years in the Air Force before turning to commercial aviation. He'd flown through sandstorms in Iraq, evaded missile locks in Kosovo, and seen command structures rise and fall on the backs of decisions made in seconds. He had earned his stripes by staying calm when others lost their grip. But now, staring out at a calm sea of stars over the eastern seaboard, he felt something stir that hadn't surfaced in decades. Memory. A drill sergeant in 1998 who forgot to assign him boots. A general who called him son with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. An instructor who joked about affirmative action every time he passed a flight exam. He'd buried those years, mostly, but now they surfaced like oil on water, slick and undeniable. Because he knew that kind of treatment. He knew what it looked like, and he knew exactly how it felt. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. "Thank you, Captain," Victor replied. "You'll find the crew member's name is Cheryl Baker. Start there." Ray hung up the phone. Hughes was watching him now, more alert. "Problem?" "Cabin issue," Ray said. "Take the controls. I'll be back." "I have the aircraft," Hughes replied, slipping his hands onto the yoke as Ray unbuckled. The cockpit door hissed open, and Ray stepped into the quiet of the forward galley. Low cabin lighting glowed blue across sleeping passengers. A few overhead reading lamps dotted the scene like stars. His eyes moved first to row 3. There she was, small, still, wrapped in what was clearly an adult man's blazer. Not a uniform blanket, no pillow, no drink on her tray. Her eyes were closed, but her brow was furrowed in sleep. Ray looked around the rest of the cabin. Blankets on every other passenger. Even those not using them had them folded neatly in their laps or beside their bags. He moved silently to the galley, where Brandon Holmes was sorting inventory under dim lighting. "Brandon." The attendant turned, surprised. "Captain?" "A word. Now." Brandon followed him into the crew area. Ray's voice was low, firm. "Why doesn't the girl in 3A have a blanket?" Brandon hesitated. Cheryl said we ran short. Inventory issue." Ray crossed his arms. "We're stocked with 12 blankets for 8 seats. That's standard. I confirmed it pre-flight." Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. I'm not sure, sir." "You are," Ray said. "You saw what happened, didn't you?" Brandon didn't answer. Ray took one step closer. "This isn't just a passenger. She's Victor Carter's daughter." Brandon's eyes widened. "I didn't know." "That's the point," Ray said. "We treat everyone the same, and we failed." He turned and walked toward the rear of the cabin. Cheryl was chatting quietly with another crew member near the back galley. She spotted Ray coming and straightened. "Captain?" she said, all professional charm. "In the galley, now." Once inside, Ray closed the door. "Why did the girl in 3A not receive a blanket?" "We were short," Cheryl replied smoothly. "Ground must have misloaded." Ray held up a hand. "Stop. I've seen the footage. You had extra. You threw one away." Cheryl's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Ray leaned in, voice quiet but lethal. "Live surveillance, Miss Baker. You were recorded discarding a sealed blanket into the trash. You skipped the passenger deliberately. You've been observed denying her water and questioning her boarding pass 3 times. That passenger is 12 years old, and she is the daughter of the man who runs this airline." Silence. Then, a whisper. "I didn't know." You weren't supposed to. Ray stepped back. Prepare yourself. You won't be finishing this flight. He turned, left her in the galley, and moved forward again. He retrieved one of the sealed blankets still stacked in the upper compartment, then paused at the service drawer, found a packet of hot chocolate. He returned to 3A. Naomi's eyes opened as he knelt beside her. I believe you requested this earlier, he said gently, placing the blanket on her lap. She blinked, surprised. Thank you. I'm sorry for the oversight, Ray added. Hot chocolate is on the way. She gave him a faint smile, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't, he said. You reminded us who we're supposed to be. Then he stood and returned to the cockpit. The controls felt heavier in his hands. Hughes glanced at him. Update? We're diverting, Ray said. To where? Cleveland, unscheduled. Crew removal. Hughes nodded slowly. Copy that. Ray looked out the window as the stars blurred into clouds below. Some flights changed direction for weather, others for emergencies. But this one? This flight was changing course for dignity. Captain Ray Coleman moved swiftly, but without panic. He'd spent a lifetime mastering the art of decisive calm, especially when everyone else was watching. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to slam doors. All he needed now were facts, and the facts were about to speak for themselves. Back in the forward galley, he opened the overhead storage unit labeled First Class Service. Inside, stacked in perfect order, were 6 sealed blue blankets. Clean, untouched, and identical to those given to every other passenger in the cabin. Ray didn't touch them at first. He just stood there. The sound of the aircraft, a low, constant hum, felt louder in that moment, like the plane itself was holding its breath. 6 blankets, for 8 seats, and according to Cheryl, they'd run out. He reached in, pulled one gently from the top, broke the seal, and tucked it under his arm. Then he opened the second drawer. Beverages, hot water packets, coffee, cocoa, all accounted for. He pulled a hot chocolate sachet, snapped it between his fingers as if confirming it was intact, and stepped back into the aisle. He didn't go to Cheryl. Not yet. He walked to Brandon Holmes. The lead flight attendant stood near the jump seat, rigid, his hands clasped behind him like a soldier at attention. He'd watched it all, the blanket denial, the repeated questioning, the silence that followed. But he'd said nothing. Mr. Holmes, Ray said, just loud enough for him to hear. Make this hot. He handed him the cocoa packet. Deliver it to 3A, no delay. Brandon nodded, taking the packet, but his hand trembled slightly. As Ray turned, Cheryl emerged from the galley, composed but pale. She clearly knew something had changed. The air around her was different, heavier, expectant. Her smile twitched at the corners, an attempt to recover control. Captain, I think we should... Ray raised one hand, just a gesture. Cheryl stopped talking. I found 6 blankets in the forward bin, he said evenly, all still sealed. There must have been a miscount, she replied quickly. Sometimes the ground crew... Ray didn't blink. You told me we were out. I was only going by what I saw during initial service. It's possible one of the newer crew members restocked without logging it. I reviewed the security feed, Ray said. His voice was calm, but it carried a finality that made Cheryl's spine stiffen. I saw you discard one of those blankets, sealed, into trash, before service concluded. She opened her mouth, closed it again. There is no technical issue, he added. Only an ethical one. A few heads nearby turned slightly. Passengers couldn't hear the details, but the tension was unmistakable. Something was happening. Brandon returned a moment later, hot chocolate in hand, and moved toward Naomi's seat. As he leaned down, Naomi looked up in surprise, her eyes wide. The contrast between the care now shown and the coldness earlier was jarring. As he handed her the cup, his fingers brushed hers, and with that motion, he slipped something into her palm, a folded note. No one else saw. Not Cheryl, not Ray, not even Marcus. Naomi blinked, lips parting slightly, then looked down. She kept her hand closed. Brandon gave her a faint nod, then walked away. She waited until he was gone, then slowly unfolded the paper beneath her tray table. "I know the truth. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. You didn't deserve this. B." Naomi's throat tightened. She wasn't used to adults admitting they were wrong. She wasn't used to anyone choosing the hard path, especially when staying quiet was easier. But Brandon had taken a step. Even if late, even if small, it mattered. She tucked the note into her science folder between her carbon absorption charts and soil sample breakdowns. Somehow, it belonged there. Another piece of data, another proof that systems weren't just machines, they were made of people. People who chose, who either stepped forward or looked away. Back at the galley, Cheryl tried again. "Captain, I think this is being blown out of proportion. The child didn't complain. We can offer her additional service now and resolve this privately." Ray stared at her. "No." His tone was quiet, almost gentle, but final. "Service isn't something we offer selectively to fix a mistake. It's something every passenger is owed, and she's not the child. She has a name, and if you had taken the time to ask it, we might not be here." Cheryl's lips thinned. Her mask cracked. "I'd like to speak to a union rep before any further action is taken," she said, retreating behind protocol. "You'll get that chance," Ray replied. "On the ground." Cheryl's eyes widened slightly. "You're diverting?" Ray didn't respond. He didn't have to. Behind them, the aircraft's trajectory had already begun to shift, subtly, a few degrees at a time, toward Cleveland. In the cockpit, First Officer Hughes was on comms with the tower. New ETA calculated. A ground team had been alerted. Victor Carter had seen to it personally. Cheryl walked away, spine stiff, every inch of her posture screaming defiance. But there was a tremble now in her steps. The first-class cabin settled again into silence. Naomi cradled the hot chocolate in both hands, letting the warmth seep through her fingers. It wasn't just the drink. It was the meaning behind it. Someone had seen her, acknowledged her, not as a problem, not as a mistake, but as a person. She looked out the window. Below, scattered lights marked the edge of a city she couldn't yet name. Above, the stars kept burning, and behind her, slowly, surely, masks were beginning to fall. Captain Ray Coleman stood at the front of the cabin, one hand lightly gripping the intercom handset. His voice crackled through the overhead speakers, low and steady, with the clarity of command honed from years of war and weather. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to a developing situation with one of our crew, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Philadelphia. Our expected ground time will be approximately 1 hour. I apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding." The cabin froze. Phones were lowered. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A hush fell, heavy and uncertain. Cheryl Baker, standing at the edge of the galley, blinked once, then again. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The color drained from her face like a dimming light bulb. She gripped the edge of the service cart as if it could anchor her to reality. Philadelphia? She hadn't expected that. Brandon, behind her, didn't speak. But he didn't need to. The way he stood, shoulders back, jaw clenched, spoke volumes. He wouldn't protect her, not anymore. In row 3, Naomi felt the tension shift around her. It wasn't panic, not yet. But it was something sharper than curiosity. Passengers exchanged looks. Some turned in their seats. The man in 2B pulled out his phone, glancing between Cheryl and the captain. Marcus Allen sat straighter, his expression unreadable. But his eyes flicked between Naomi, Cheryl, and Judith Fields, who was still quietly scribbling into her notebook. Naomi, for her part, said nothing. She held the cup of hot chocolate in her lap, now half empty, the note from Brandon safely tucked away in her folder. Her body was warming, but her mind raced. Why Philadelphia? What would happen next? Would her father? She didn't finish the thought. 3 rows back, Judith capped her pen and slowly stood. All eyes shifted toward her. She was older, yes, but there was something commanding about her presence, something refined. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I believe we all deserve to know what's going on," she said calmly. "Some of us have witnessed behavior tonight that raises serious legal and ethical concerns." Cheryl stiffened, then turned, attempting a mask of professionalism. "Ma'am, I'd ask you to remain seated." "I'm not finished," Judith said, cutting across her with surgical precision. The cabin fell silent again. "I've documented every interaction involving the passenger in 3A," she continued, gesturing toward Naomi. "From the moment she was questioned at the gate, to the withholding of a blanket, to repeated denials of standard service." A pause. "I am Judith Fields, former civil rights attorney, 42 years practicing federal discrimination law, and this," she pointed a finger directly at Cheryl, "is actionable misconduct." Cheryl opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Judith didn't wait. Passengers like this young lady have faced subtle racism hidden under smiles and service scripts for generations. But what you've done tonight isn't subtle. It's on camera, it's corroborated, and it's unforgivable. Murmurs broke out around the cabin. The man in 2B began recording. The woman in 4A wiped at her eyes. Even the flight attendant from economy, summoned by the noise, paused in the curtain gap and took a step back. Then Judith turned to Naomi, and in a softer voice, almost maternal, she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" Naomi frowned, startled. "No, ma'am." Judith smiled gently. "I knew your mother, Dana. We were college roommates. She was brilliant, fierce. You look just like her." Naomi's eyes widened. You knew my mom?" "From the first moment I saw you at the gate, I suspected. But when I heard your name, I knew for sure. Ellis was her maiden name. And your voice, so much like hers." Twist 6. Hit Naomi like a quiet thunderclap. The woman who had been defending her all this time, documenting everything, wasn't just any stranger. She was part of her mother's past. Judith took a breath. "Your mother would be proud of you, so proud. She fought her own battles with dignity, and she'd want you to know what happened here tonight isn't about your worth. It's about their failure, not yours." Naomi felt her throat tighten. Her fingers curled around the edge of the seat. For a moment she couldn't speak. She just nodded, once, sharply. Ray stepped forward then, standing at Judith's side. "Ms. Fields, thank you for your testimony." He turned to the passengers. "I've confirmed through surveillance and documentation that a serious breach of service and conduct occurred tonight. Upon landing in Philadelphia, Ms. Baker will be removed from duty, pending investigation." Cheryl visibly flinched. Marcus let out a slow exhale, his shoulders easing. The cabin filled with whispers again, some disbelieving, others relieved. Judith sat back down, her message delivered. But her presence remained like a lighthouse, steadfast, guiding. As the plane began its gradual descent, Naomi finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "She knew my mom." Marcus leaned closer. "Seems like your mom left you a few angels." Naomi nodded, blinking back sudden tears. For the first time since the flight began, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. As the cabin crew prepared for landing, Cheryl stood silently by the galley, her face blank. The composure had cracked, and beneath it was something raw. Fear, shame, or simply shock at a system she thought would protect her, finally choosing not to. Captain Ray returned to the cockpit. First Officer Hughes looked over. "Everything handled?" Ray nodded. "It's being corrected." Outside the window, Philadelphia grew larger beneath them. Runways lit like veins in the dark, waiting. Inside the cabin, justice had begun to land. The wheels of Flight 784 touched down at Philadelphia International Airport with a dull thud, the kind that sent a subtle jolt through every spine on board. But this time, No one clapped. No one murmured relief. Instead, a thick silence cloaked the cabin. Anticipation, tension, and something else rising beneath the surface. Fury. As the aircraft taxied toward a remote gate, Naomi pressed her forehead lightly against the window. She could already see them, figures in dark uniforms standing at the end of the jet bridge. Police officers, airport security, and beside them, a sharply dressed woman in a navy blazer with a United Atlantic lapel pin, flanked by two men holding clipboards and earpieces. Ray Coleman's voice came through the intercom again, steady and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we arrive at the gate. We'll be holding briefly before opening the doors. Thank you for your continued cooperation." But the calm in his tone couldn't mask the undercurrent. Something real was happening, and everyone could feel it. Cheryl Baker stood rigid by the galley, hands clasped, her jaw clenched so tight it seemed carved from stone. Her eyes darted toward the front, then to the officers waiting beyond the glass. She glanced once at Brandon, who refused to look back. Naomi's heart raced. She wasn't used to being at the center of anything. She preferred backstage, data, control. This attention, this spotlight, felt like heat against raw skin. Then the door opened. The police were the first to step aboard. Their movements methodical, professional. They didn't reach for handcuffs. They didn't raise voices. But their presence alone created a shift. Passengers leaned, whispering. Behind them stepped the woman in the navy blazer. She moved with practiced authority and zero hesitation. "Ms. Baker," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm Samantha Brooks, Regional Director of Flight Operations. Please step into the jet bridge. We need to speak with you." Cheryl didn't move. "I've done nothing wrong," she said tightly. "I enforced policy." Passengers scoffed. One woman in 4C rolled her eyes audibly. "You enforced your own policy," Judith Fields replied from her seat. "Not the airlines, and certainly not the laws." Samantha's eyes flicked to the uniformed officers. "Please escort her from the aircraft." "Wait," Cheryl started, stepping back. "This is insane. I'm being railroaded over a blanket." But even as the words left her mouth, they landed with a dead thud. Everyone had heard the truth by now. Everyone had seen. Two officers flanked her, still not touching, but close enough to eliminate any argument. Cheryl's shoulders slumped, but her eyes remained wild. "You'll hear from my lawyer. This is discrimination against me." No one responded. As she stepped off the plane, the passengers behind her erupted, not in applause, but in pointed silence, a statement louder than clapping ever could be. Brandon exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Then the woman in the blazer turned to Naomi. "Miss Ellis, Naomi," she corrected herself. "There's someone waiting for you just inside the terminal." Naomi's breath caught. Then, from behind the cluster of officers, a tall figure appeared. Broad-shouldered, composed, his suit immaculate despite the late hour. His face, normally unreadable in boardrooms, had softened into something raw. Victor Carter. "Dad," Naomi whispered. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her before she could say another word. Not hard, not possessively, just tightly enough to tell her, "It's over. You're safe." She sank into the embrace. Behind them, the flash of cameras erupted. Twist 7 arrived without warning. From the far back of the plane, a man in a gray hoodie stepped off the aircraft holding his phone high. His live stream, already running for over an hour, captured everything: the cabin, the removal, the reunion. The overlay on the video feed showed real-time comments scrolling faster than eyes could follow. "This is unreal. That flight attendant better be fired for life. Her dad's the freaking COO? Imagine doing all that to the wrong black girl." #blankets are for everyone. By the time Naomi and Victor walked into the terminal, the video had already surpassed 4 million views. By sunrise, it would hit 20. Dozens of journalists had assembled outside the security barrier. News had spread like wildfire through aviation forums, employee leaks, and live passenger updates. Victor didn't acknowledge the cameras. He kept his arm protectively around Naomi, shielding her from the flashes. But even as they walked, Naomi glanced at the strangers watching her, and this time, she didn't flinch. She stood a little taller. Back on the aircraft, Marcus Allen opened his own phone. Notifications exploded across his screen. Messages, interview requests, links to the video. He smiled faintly and tapped out a quick response to his board. She handled herself better than most adults I know. Keep an eye on this one. Judith Fields remained in her seat for a moment longer, watching the final ripple of the moment pass through the cabin. Then, with grace, she packed her notebook. She didn't need to record anymore. The world was watching now. By dawn, the internet was ablaze. The video taken from the rear of Flight 784, showing Cheryl Baker's removal and Naomi's tearful reunion with her father, had crossed 10 million views before most of America had finished their morning coffee. By lunchtime, it was 27 million, trending across every major platform. 2 hashtags dominated. #blankets for everyone, Naomi Carter. And with every new retweet, every post, every thread, a tidal wave of personal stories followed. Thousands of black and brown passengers, past and present, flooded timelines with eerily similar experiences. Denied service, extra questioning, overlooked comfort requests. Professional courtesy applied unevenly depending on skin tone, age, accent, or last name. And then the pattern emerged. Dozens of these stories pointed to one name: Cheryl Baker. She'd served on routes across the country for 5 years. New York to LAX, Dallas to Seattle, Miami to Boston. Always polished, always passing performance reviews. But now, former passengers, some hesitant, others outraged, began posting receipts. Flight numbers, emails, complaint screenshots, all buried, all unresolved. A woman named Tasha Green wrote, "This is the same flight attendant who once told me, 'Ma'am, priority boarding isn't for family visits,' even though my ticket clearly said Group 1. I was flying to my grandmother's funeral." A high school teacher posted, "I remember her. I asked for water for my daughter, who was scared during turbulence, and she rolled her eyes. Treated the man beside us like a king." The floodgates opened. The airline's public relations team scrambled to issue a statement. "United Atlantic Airways does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. We are conducting a full investigation and reviewing past service records of all crew members. The employee in question has been suspended pending outcome." But it wasn't enough, because someone else had just stepped forward. Brandon Holmes, the lead flight attendant from Flight 784. He released a formal statement on his LinkedIn profile, raw, unfiltered, and painfully honest. "I failed to speak up when it mattered. I witnessed misconduct. I remained silent. And by doing so, I became part of the problem. I apologize to Naomi Carter. I apologize to every passenger I failed to protect." That silence ends now. The post went viral. His vulnerability, unlike the corporate statement, struck a nerve. Other crew members quietly messaged him, thanking him. A few admitted they'd seen similar things and stayed quiet too. Still, questions remained. Why had none of the previous complaints stuck? Why hadn't the pattern been flagged? That's when Twist 8 hit. It started as a single, anonymous email sent to a journalist at a mid-sized tech outlet. Subject: Internal flag suppression protocols. UA systems inside was a trove of data logs, system diagrams, and internal communications from the airline's IT infrastructure. The sender? An anonymous software engineer, still employed by United Atlantic, who had grown increasingly disturbed by what he'd uncovered over the past year. His claim? The airline's customer service algorithm had been deliberately modified, not to filter spam, as publicly claimed, but to bury any complaints that included terms like discrimination, racism, bias, or profiling. It didn't delete them. That would have raised red flags. It buried them, downranked them, assigned them to lower-tier agents with no escalation privileges, made them vanish inside a digital maze of pending review folders. The IT engineer, calling himself Echo 76, provided screenshots and audit trails. He explained how, during a system update 2 years earlier, someone from senior management had signed off on a recommendation to optimize customer flag resolution time, a phrase that, in practice, meant prioritizing issues least likely to cause PR damage. The journalist published the story within hours. Then it exploded. Major news networks picked it up. Lawmakers tweeted statements of concern. Civil rights groups demanded an investigation. The Department of Transportation issued a press release stating it would launch a formal inquiry into United Atlantic's customer service protocols. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one girl in one blanket. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed by an algorithm trained to minimize corporate discomfort. Victor Carter, still reeling from the personal and professional crossfire, made a rare public appearance on camera. Standing beside Naomi outside their home in Chicago, he addressed the media directly. "My daughter was humiliated," he said plainly. "Not because of a policy, but because of a pattern. And that pattern was enabled by systems we were supposed to trust." He paused. "As an executive, I hold myself accountable for not seeing it sooner. As a father, I vow it will never happen again. Not just to her, not to anyone." Naomi, standing beside him in a navy hoodie and jeans, said nothing. But her quiet gaze into the cameras told the world. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence was enough. That night, the airline's stock dropped 6%. Board members scheduled an emergency meeting. Internally, a purge began. The software team initiated a forensic audit. The customer experience VP resigned. Union leaders demanded crew retraining standards be overhauled. But more than that, passengers, employees, activists had found their voice. Social media became a chorus of outrage and solidarity. Blankets are for everyone. Fix the system. Believe your passengers. Judith Fields, meanwhile, re-emerged on cable news. When asked what made her start documenting on the flight, she replied simply, "Because I've seen this before, and I promised myself I wouldn't stay silent again." As for Brandon, he'd been invited to speak at an aviation ethics conference, and he said yes, not as an expert, but as proof that people, yes, even those who failed at first, can choose to do better. The hearing chamber on Capitol Hill was unusually full for a midweek morning. Media vans lined the streets. Lobbyists loitered just outside the doors. Photographers jostled for angles. And in the center of it all sat Naomi Carter, 12 years old, navy blazer, crisp white blouse, hair pulled into a neat twist that her father had helped her perfect that morning. She clutched a folder on her lap. Not her science notes this time, but the written version of the statement she was about to read before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. The session had been convened in response to public outcry after the revelations surrounding United Atlantic Airways. Cheryl Baker's conduct was the tip of the iceberg. The buried complaints, the algorithmic filtering. The wave of stories that followed had forced Congress to act. Subpoenas had gone out. CEOs were summoned. But it wasn't just about corporate accountability anymore. It was about systemic reform. Next to Naomi sat her father, Victor Carter, stone-faced in a tailored gray suit. Though still COO, he'd voluntarily stepped back from internal investigations to avoid conflict of interest. Today, he was here only as a father. The room quieted. A congresswoman leaned into her microphone. "We now recognize Miss Naomi Carter, who has asked to deliver a personal statement regarding her experience aboard Flight 784. Naomi rose. She didn't look scared, just steady. She unfolded her paper, took a breath, and began. "My name is Naomi Carter. I'm a student, a science nerd. I love city parks and measuring how trees breathe. I was flying to Boston to talk about my carbon capture model." She paused. "But instead, I ended up representing something else. I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it, but I won't ignore it. She described, simply and clearly, what had happened. The skipped blanket, the 3 boarding pass checks, the overheard comment, the silence from the crew, the kindness of strangers, the warmth of a hot chocolate offered too late, but still meaningful. And then she said the words that shifted the room. I don't want special treatment. I don't want revenge. I just want systems that don't ignore people who look like me. Soft murmurs rippled across the gallery. She looked up. I didn't come here to punish anyone, but I believe what happened should never happen again. Not to another girl, not to anyone. Victor blinked rapidly, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. Judith Fields, seated a few rows behind, wiped her glasses slowly. Applause wasn't allowed during hearings, but it wouldn't have mattered. Everyone was too stunned by the stillness Naomi left behind. After her, the CEO spoke. The head of United Atlantic, Gregory Sumner, was grilled about oversight failures. How did a pattern like this go unnoticed? One senator asked. Were there internal warnings you ignored? Sumner shifted uncomfortably. The system was designed to streamline, not suppress. Yet it suppressed, the senator snapped. Sumner hesitated, then nodded. Yes, and we failed. The code failed. But more importantly, the culture failed. That was true. But not everyone saw this as a tragedy. Some saw it as opportunity. Twist 9 arrived 2 days later. Delta, JetBlue, even smaller players like Pacific Wings issued statements condemning United Atlantic's actions, loudly, publicly. But behind closed doors, their PR teams pushed harder. Leaks, insider documents, paid influencers hinting that other airlines do better. Quiet attempts to lure top-tier customers away. Victor received calls, polite, subtle conversations. Would Naomi consider giving a statement on travel equality? For us? We'd love to spotlight her as part of our commitment to youth empowerment. One airline even floated a lucrative scholarship opportunity, tied directly to Naomi's public endorsement. Victor brought each proposal to Naomi. He didn't filter, didn't pressure, just presented the facts. And Naomi, after listening carefully, answered plainly. No. Not even the scholarship? Victor asked. Naomi shook her head. If they really cared, they'd help quietly, not use me as a banner. Victor smiled slowly. That sounds like something your mother would have said. She smiled back. She hated performative anything. Naomi agreed to support policy changes, educational outreach, training reform, but not branding campaigns, not weaponized virtue. I just want a world where girls like me don't have to make people uncomfortable to be visible, she said in an interview later. Her restraint, her refusal to be commodified, only made her story more powerful. Meanwhile, civil rights groups called for deeper tech audits. The Department of Transportation launched a formal review across all major airlines. A new bill, tentatively titled the Passenger Fairness and Transparency Act, gathered bipartisan support. Its core: prohibit any automated filtering of discrimination-related complaints, require mandatory escalation reviews, and enforce public reporting. Naomi's testimony became the emotional center of the movement. Not angry, not accusatory, but undeniable. Victor returned to work slowly, taking meetings from home at first. His colleagues walked on eggshells at first, unsure how to address what had happened. But Victor made it easy. I don't need comfort, he told one executive. I need change. Internally, United Atlantic began restructuring its customer service protocols. The AI system that once buried complaints was dismantled, replaced with human review. Diversity training was revamped. A new internal board was created, with Naomi as honorary youth advisor. She accepted only on one condition. I want real power to recommend change. Not a title, not a photo op, just agency. The company agreed, and slowly, surely, the tide began to turn, not just for United Atlantic, but for the industry and beyond. The Boston Convention and Exhibition Center hummed with anticipation. It was the final day of the International Youth Climate Congress, and the main auditorium, normally quiet at this hour, was packed with students, scientists, educators, and media. Cameramen adjusted their lenses. Panelists flipped through notes. Security personnel lined the exits in subtle formation. At the center of the stage, a podium stood beneath a bright digital banner: Urban Innovation, Youth Solutions for a Warming World. And soon, standing at that podium, would be a girl who had never asked to become a national symbol. Naomi Carter sat backstage, legs crossed tightly, gripping her tablet. It was the moment she'd prepared for, the one that had been nearly overshadowed by everything else, the one she still wanted more than any spotlight, any headline, her presentation. Breathe back. Optimizing carbon sequestration through urban green space planning. 12 years old, and her work had already drawn interest from environmental think tanks and 3 city planning commissions. Not because of who her father was, not because of viral fame, but because the math worked, the science held. Across the curtain, the MC stepped up to the microphone. And now, our final youth speaker, representing the United States, a student scientist whose story has captured the attention of millions, but whose work stands on its own merit. Please welcome Naomi Carter. The crowd erupted before she even stepped out. Standing ovation. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. A wave of applause surged forward like thunder. Naomi inhaled sharply, stood, and walked onto the stage. But unlike the wide-eyed girl who'd boarded Flight 784 just days earlier, she now walked with stillness, composure, a quiet confidence forged not by attention, but by survival. "Thank you," she said softly into the microphone. "I'm here to talk about trees and how they save cities." Laughter rippled gently. She smiled, just a little. Then she began. For 15 minutes, Naomi walked the audience through her project, a system that mapped underutilized green zones, calculated potential carbon storage, and provided an AI-assisted recommendation engine for local governments to optimize city layouts for environmental impact. She explained how she'd gathered data from satellite overlays, local urban forestry departments, and citizen-reported pollution metrics. She cited case studies. She answered 2 impromptu questions from the panel with clarity beyond her years. And when she finished, she said simply, "This isn't just about science. It's about making sure every community, especially the ones that look like mine, get the clean air they deserve." The crowd stood again, longer, louder. And this time, Naomi didn't look surprised. She simply nodded once, respectfully, and stepped down. Off stage, Victor waited with a glass of water. He didn't hug her. Not yet. He knew she didn't like that in public. But his eyes glistened. "You did it, Jazz," he said softly. "You did it." Nearby, Marcus Allen stood beside Judith Fields, both clapping with the kind of energy reserved not for celebrities, but for victories that mattered. Judith leaned in. "Time to move." They walked together down a private hallway toward the press room, but paused just short. "Before we go in," Marcus said, reaching into his bag, "we'd like to show you something." He pulled out a slim leather folder and handed it to Naomi. She opened it. Inside was a letterhead: the Naomi Carter Foundation for STEM Access. Underneath, a mission statement: supporting the education and empowerment of underrepresented girls in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Naomi blinked. Judith added, "Initial funding secured. 5 full scholarships this year, 10 next. We'll grow it as far as you want to take it." Naomi looked up. "You named it after me?" Marcus chuckled. "You think we'd name it after ourselves?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "Did you two coordinate this with my PR team?" Judith smiled wryly. "No press, no sponsors, just quiet backing. No one owns this but her." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she held the folder. "I don't know what to say," Marcus replied. "You already did, on stage." The room grew quiet for a moment. Then Judith added more gently, "We're not trying to make you carry the world, Naomi. Just light a path others can walk." Naomi nodded. "I want to help." but I don't want to be the face of everything. And there it was, twist 10. Later that day, when United Atlantic offered her the role of youth ambassador for passenger equity, Naomi respectfully declined. Politely, publicly. "I appreciate the offer," she told the CEO in a call. "But I just want to be a kid again. I want to do science. I want to go back to school. I don't want to spend the next 5 years smiling for cameras." Victor had been listening in, and when she hung up, he gave her the smallest of nods. "You don't owe anyone your story," he said. "Not unless you want to share it." Naomi smiled. The following week, the airline announced Victor Carter would chair a newly formed Independent Service Reform Council, reporting directly to the board. Unlike the advisory panels of the past, this one had teeth: budget authority, policy control, and whistleblower protection measures. Victor accepted on one condition: that his daughter never be used as a brand shield. They agreed. Across the industry, ripple effects continued. Other carriers began reviewing complaint algorithms. The Department of Transportation drafted new guidelines on AI transparency. Several international airlines reached out to Naomi's school, quietly offering mentorship programs, STEM exchanges. Naomi's response? Send it to the foundation. She didn't need another title. What she wanted was progress. Back home in Chicago, a quiet ceremony took place at her school. No cameras, no stage. Just her science teacher, a few classmates, and a new green plaque on the lab wall. In honor of Naomi Carter for showing us that systems can change. She never stopped being a scientist. She just expanded her field of study, from carbon to courage. 6 months had passed. The snow had melted from the sidewalks of Chicago's South Side, replaced by early spring blooms and the hum of city life slowly warming again. But inside the modest brick building on 49th Street, something far more powerful was beginning to grow. Naomi Carter stood in front of a long folding table, surrounded by 7 curious kids between the ages of 8 and 11. Each wore oversized lab coats, safety goggles slightly too big, and carried clipboards with printed worksheets. The table was cluttered with soil samples, small digital sensors, and a stack of laminated city maps marked with green and yellow highlighters. "Okay," Naomi said, crouching down to meet their level. "Who can tell me why this neighborhood needs more green space?" A hand shot up. "Because trees suck up bad air and give us oxygen?" Naomi grinned. "Exactly, Andre. But what's even cooler is that trees store carbon. So we're going to figure out where to plant the most effective trees in this area. Not just to make it pretty, but to help the whole city breathe better." The kids beamed. They weren't just playing pretend scientists. They were scientists. This was the first community project of the Naomi Carter Foundation for STEM Access, launched by Judith Fields and Marcus Allen, and now partnered with 3 local schools. The program was designed to give children in under-resourced neighborhoods access to real research tools, mentorship, and fieldwork. Naomi had insisted on being hands-on. She didn't want to be a logo. She wanted to teach. After the workshop, the kids filed out to the community garden behind the building, where they began measuring tree shadows and recording soil moisture. Naomi stayed behind to clean up. Her dad arrived just as she finished stacking the last clipboard. Victor Carter, still sharp in a gray wool coat and pressed slacks, but now with a softness in his eyes that hadn't always been there. "You good?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Naomi nodded. "Yeah, they're smart. One of them figured out how to bypass the map grid system because he thought it was inefficient." Victor laughed. "You're creating monsters." "Efficient monsters," Naomi replied. They walked together to the car, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. On the ride home, Victor glanced at her. "You know, I got another call today." "From who?" "Global Air. Offered you lifetime elite status. First class, any route, any time. Free." Naomi rolled her eyes. "Let me guess. They want a photo with me on the tarmac in a lab coat, holding a boarding pass and smiling into the clouds?" Victor smirked. "Something like that. I said no last time. My answer's the same. I know. Naomi looked out the window. I don't want to be the airline girl forever. That's not who I am. Victor nodded. That's not who you have to be. She was quiet for a moment. But I don't regret it. Speaking up, I think it mattered. Victor didn't answer right away, because he knew better than anyone. It mattered more than she could ever measure. On the other side of the country, in a sleek conference room at United Atlantic's Crew Training Center, a very different kind of class was just beginning. The projector hummed softly. 20 new hires in crisp uniforms sat with notebooks ready, their expressions a mix of excitement and nervousness. Then the instructor walked in. Brandon Holmes, no longer a lead flight attendant, no longer flying at all. He set his folder on the podium and looked out at the room. His face was calm, but when he spoke, his voice was clear and unflinching. I used to think staying silent made me neutral. He let that sentence hang for a moment. It doesn't. He clicked the first slide. It read, Ethical presence in the skies, responsibility beyond protocol. I'm here today because I didn't do enough, Brandon continued. Because I watched someone be mistreated and I didn't step in, I let policy and pressure become an excuse. He paused again, then added, I stood still while a child was humiliated, and I will never, ever do that again. The room was still. Brandon didn't teach from fear. He taught from truth. And slowly, word spread. Other airlines requested guest lectures. Aviation schools invited him to speak. His former silence had become his greatest warning and his loudest lesson. He never mentioned Naomi's name. He didn't have to. Her story had become part of the training curriculum. Not the scandal, not the hashtags, but the change. 3 months later, a quiet milestone arrived with little fanfare. A bill passed through Congress. The Passenger Fairness and Transparency Act. Unanimous vote. Mandatory audit systems. Anti-bias training for all customer-facing aviation staff. Real-time complaint visibility protocols. Oversight committee. Protected whistleblower channels. The airline industry had changed. Not overnight, not completely, but measurably. At the signing ceremony, Victor was invited to speak, but declined. Instead, he recommended a video message from someone else. Naomi appeared on screen in a recorded statement. This law won't fix everything, she said, but it makes sure people get heard. That's a start. Simple, direct, and powerful. That summer, the Naomi Carter Foundation received its largest private donation yet, from an anonymous source. Enough to expand the STEM program to 5 more cities. Enough to ensure that Naomi's name would open doors, not just headlines. On a quiet evening in September, Naomi sat on the roof of their apartment building with her dad. The city glowed below. Stars blinked faintly above. She had a science fair in the morning. Nothing national, just school level. She was presenting a composting project. Kinda low-key for you, huh? Victor teased. She shrugged. I just want to test if banana peels break down faster in sun-warmed soil or shade. Victor smiled. Back to basics. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm not trying to save the world anymore, she said. Just trying to understand it. Victor kissed her forehead. That's more than enough. They sat there in the quiet, the hum of the city below, the wind soft in their ears. No cameras, no hashtags, just a father, just a daughter, and a legacy that would grow quietly, like roots beneath a tree, hidden from view, but strong enough to hold up the sky.